All right, boys and girls. Thank you for joining me today for the greatest chess lesson of all time, even better than last week. I am your instructor, Coach Daniel Brennan. Let me start out by saying that I miss you all. I hope you're doing well, and I'm very happy to see some familiar faces tuning in. So the title of the lesson today is "The Pen is Mightier Than the Sword." Of course, I'm not talking about a pen that you write with. Rather, I'm talking about a chess pin spelled P-I-N. By the end of our time together, I want you to know exactly what a pin is. I want you to be able to identify two types of pins because there are a couple of them. And lastly, I hope that you will start to recognize pins and opportunities for pins in your own chess games. You've probably heard the word pin before, again, P-I-N, used in one of two ways. If you pin something, you're holding it so that it can't move. If you wrestle with your friend and you pin them against the ground, that means they can't move. A clothespin holds clothes so that they don't move around in the wind, and a hairpin holds your hair so that it won't move. You might also know the word pin as a sharp, pointy piece of metal, a whole lot like a needle. And what is it used for? It's used to hold things in place. The words are all related. And this applies directly to our chess definition too. Enough talk, I'll show you what I mean. In the position on the board, white is going to play bishop to c3. This is an example of a pin. The white bishop on c3 is pinning the black pawn on e5 so that it is not allowed to move. The pawn is not allowed to move because then black's king would be in check. The pawn is preventing white's bishop from seeing black's king. Black's pawn is therefore frozen. Every pin in chess involves two pieces and something valuable being shielded. Usually, this is another piece. The first piece is the attacking piece that creates the pin. The second piece is the defensive piece being pinned. It acts like a shield for a more valuable target behind it. So in our position here, the attacking piece creating the pin is white's bishop on c3. The defensive shield piece being attacked and pinned is black's pawn on e5. And the valuable target behind the shield is black's king on h8. Here is a similar position, but with different pieces involved. The idea is still the same. The attacking piece creating the pin is white's rook on d1. The defensive shield piece being pinned is black's knight on d3. And the valuable target hiding behind the knight shield is black's king on d8. You've probably heard that at the end of every rainbow, there is a big pot of gold. Well, at the end of every pin, there is also a pot of gold. There's always a valuable target there. In this case, black's king on d8. Here, white is looking for a way to pin black's bishop on d6 to black's king on a6. Notice that pins only happen when the attacking piece, the shield piece, and the valuable target being shielded, the pot of gold, are all in a straight line. Let's look back to verify that this is true for our other examples. In our first example, the bishop, pawn, and king create a straight line. In our second example, the rook, the knight, and the king also create a straight line. And of course, this is true as well for our current example. Okay, who knows how to play connect the dots? If you do, it's a lot easier to find pins. Let's draw a straight line from black's king through black's bishop on d6. If a pin is possible, our queen is going to have to occupy one of the squares along this line. In this case, since we're talking about pins, the queen needs to be able to get to one of these 4 squares. In fact, the queen can get to 2 of those squares, so there are 2 ways to create a pin. The queen can move to g6 in addition to e6, creating a straight line between all 3 pieces and forming a pin. Since pins only occur along straight lines, this means that pins can only happen on files, ranks, and diagonals. The 8 green arrows here show you the 8 straight lines that are made by the files. Files run up and down and are represented by the letters A through H. Now, the 8 green arrows are showing you the 8 straight lines that are made up by the ranks. Ranks run sideways and are represented by the numbers 1 through 8. The only other straight lines on a chessboard exist along diagonals. These are diagonals. These are also diagonals. If I show you all the ranks, files, and diagonals at the same time, I'll have to draw a couple in because, believe it or not, doing this breaks Lichess. So here, we're drawing in all of the files, and it just looks like craziness because you are looking at every possible straight line that exists on a chessboard. This is not considered a straight line in chess because it is not along a rank, a file, or a diagonal. It's somewhere in between, and no chess pieces can move like that. We've just learned that pins can only occur along files, ranks, and diagonals. The only 2 pieces that can move along files are queens and rooks. The only 2 pieces that can move along ranks are, again, our queens and our rooks. And the only 2 pieces that can move along diagonals are queens and bishops. Therefore, the only 3 pieces that are capable of creating pins are queens, rooks, and bishops. Notice that these happen to be your 3 long-range pieces, and this is not a coincidence. Short-range pieces, the knights, the kings, and the pawns, are not capable of creating pins. Let's make sure that this is true. If white threatens black's knight, the knight can just hop away because white's pawn cannot see far enough to threaten the black king behind the knight. Of course, there is no pin here. If white's king threatens the knight, the same thing is true. The knight was already safe because black's king was already protecting it, but the knight decided to move anyway, and white's king cannot see far enough to threaten black's king behind the knight. Knights can't create pins at all because they do not move like other pieces. They hop from one square to the next, and this hopping actually makes creating pins impossible. White's knight on e3 can jump over black's knight on e4 and over black's king on e5, but it does not threaten either one. Let's look at how pins might arise naturally in the opening position of a chess game. So we'll look through the first couple of moves here. Black has several good move options here, and today he decides to use a popular defense called the Nimzo Indian, which occurs after the move bishop to b4. Here is our first example of a pin in a real game. The black bishop on b4 is pinning white's knight on c3 so that it's not allowed to move. The white knight is not allowed to move because white's king would then be in check from black's bishop. The knight is the only piece preventing black's bishop from seeing white's king. So white's knight is frozen. Again, we've got the attacker, we've got the shield piece, and we've got the pot of gold at the end of the pin. With this move, white creates a pin too. White's bishop on g5 is pinning black's knight on f6 to black's queen on d8. This is our first pin example that does not involve a king. A pin is just a situation where one defending piece is not able to move without exposing something more valuable behind it. Usually, this will be another piece. Because the queen is more valuable than the knight, we would say that the knight is pinned. It's very important to point out that black's knight is allowed to move. It's a very bad idea here, since black loses his queen, but it is legal. It is not legal, however, for white to move his knight from c3, because it is a shield piece for the white king. Let's go back and make a more sensible fourth move for black so that his queen doesn't end up being taken.
Just a second, Mr. Rennie. I'll mention this because this is something many students have learned in different classes. You may not have used the specific terms, but the terms that I believe Mr. Williams uses for these that many kids may be used to is a pin towards the king is an absolute pin. The piece absolutely can't move. Whereas a pin towards any other piece is a relative pin where the piece is allowed to move. It would just generally be a bad idea.
Right, so if you're familiar with the official chess terms, they are absolute and relative. I personally find those terms a little advanced and confusing, so I'm going to teach them as major pins and minor pins.
All right.
So let's say that black castles instead, which is, of course, the greatest move in chess. A pin against a king, I call a major pin. White's knight on c3 is frozen, and it's not allowed to move. A pin against any other piece, a queen, for example, we'll call a minor pin because the piece being pinned is not frozen. It's still allowed to move. It's just usually a bad idea to do so. Follow along at home and see if you can figure out the answers to my questions before I give them to you. In this position, there are two pins. See if you can identify both pins. I'll give you a few seconds to look, and one quick hint. Every pin starts with a simple attack and a straight line. Our first pin involves this bishop on f5. The bishop makes a simple attack against black's knight on e6. The knight is a shield for a valuable pot of gold on c8, which is black's king. And here is your straight line, just like a game of connect the dots. Our second pin involves black's rook on b8. The rook makes a simple attack against white's knight on b4, and the knight is a shield for a pot of gold on b1, white's queen. And as always, this creates a straight line. Question number 2. Which one of these two pins is a major pin, and which one is a minor pin? All right, so this is the major pin. Just like the name suggests, a major pin is a bigger deal than a minor pin. Why is it a bigger deal? Well, a major pin always means that the pot of gold at the end is a king, and the piece shielding the king is therefore frozen. It is absolutely not allowed to move. It is a major pin. The rook, the knight, and the queen on b1 form our minor pin. A minor pin is a smaller deal because the pot of gold at the end of the pin is never a king. It's anything other than a king. And this means that the shield piece is not frozen. It is allowed to move because it's just a minor pin. So, if you have not already seen my other video covering the 5 types of attacks in chess, or if you just need a refresher, I definitely suggest checking that out. That lesson is closely related to some of the ideas we're about to cover in this section of my lesson. So let's revisit the position we just finished with and take a closer look at White's major pin. It's very difficult to hit a moving target. Usually in chess, when you threaten a piece, it has the ability to just run away to safety. When you pin a piece, though, especially with a major pin, it can't move away. It becomes a target that cannot move. You can, and you should, gang up on that target with a group attack. Often, you will be able to capture the pinned piece for free. Pin it to win it is a fun quote in chess, and it's a very useful concept to be familiar with. So it's Black's turn here, and he plays rook to b6 because White was threatening to capture Black's pinned, unguarded knight on e6 for free. So Black needed to protect the knight. Black does not mind if White trades his 3-point bishop for Black's 3-point knight. This would just be an even trade. White remembered the saying, pin it to win it, and instead of going this route, he looked for a way to group attack Black's e6 knight. White found a move that attacks Black's knight on e6. The bishop and queen together are now threatening to win the knight for free. White attacks the knight 2 times, and Black only protects it 1 time with his rook on b6. Black must add another protector, and so his move is forced. Black's king helps to protect the knight, and now Black has 2 defenders against 2 attackers. The knight is safe again, but only for the moment. White has 1 more piece to add to the group attack. He realizes that if he can move his knight on b4 to somehow attack Black's knight on e6, he'll be able to win that piece for free. It takes a couple of moves, but the white knight is headed to the circled f4 square so that it can attack Black's knight on e6. Black is so tied down because of the pin, he's helpless to stop White's idea. Black's rook is under attack, so it moves to a6 where it is safe, and now White adds a 3rd attacker into his group attack against Black's knight on e6. Black has no way to add a 3rd defender. He's simply run out of pieces. White's pin it to win it strategy has worked, and he is going to capture Black's knight for free. Black can make a silly check or 2 against White's king, but it's not going to get rid of the pin. Black is completely helpless. No matter what move he makes, he's going to lose material. White finally wins the knight, and he's going to win this game in short order. Remember, pin it to win it is a good group attack strategy to gang up on a pinned piece so that you can capture it for free. So far, we've only looked at pins where the valuable pot of gold being shielded by the shield piece is another piece. Sometimes, though, the pot of gold is not another piece, but rather a very important square. Here, for example, the white rook can pin the knight to the very important b8 square. The white rook on b1 makes a simple attack on the knight, pinning it to the b8 square. If the knight moves to safety, the white rook on b1 can see the valuable b8 square. The b8 square here is a lot more important than black's knight. Do you see why? Without the black knight shielding the b8 square, white's rook can move to b8 with a checkmate. Since it's clear now that moving the black knight loses quickly, let's find a better move for black. That's a sensible idea. Since black's knight is pinned to the b8 square and it can't safely move away, black finds a way to protect it so that white's rook on b1 can't just capture it for free. White does not want to give up his 5-point rook for black's 3-point knight, and he does not have to. Instead, he can make another simple attack against this black knight with his a2 pawn. It's the familiar pin it to win it strategy. Now, white is creating a group attack on black's knight. The poor knight still can't move, or else white is going to win quickly with rook to b8 checkmate. Black does not have a way to save his knight, and white's pawn on a4 is going to capture it. A full rook up, white went on to win this game easily. Being in a pin really stinks because it takes away your piece's abilities. For example, after the familiar moves, our c3 knight is now frozen by a major pin. Our valuable c3 knight can't move, and it can't even attack, right? It can't guard anything. It can't do anything that benefits us. If we tried to make a move like e4, black's going to do a happy little dance and capture our pawn for free. White's knight on c3 cannot capture black's knight on e4 because it's still frozen by the major pin. Until we can make black's major pin go away, our knight on c3 is basically worthless. Fortunately, there are 4 ways to make a pin go away. The first is very simple. Sometimes you can capture the attacking piece that creates the pin. We can play queen takes b4, and the pin goes away. That was really easy. But what if capturing the piece is not possible, or it just isn't a good option? Here, white could still make the pin go away by playing queen takes bishop, but now he would lose his queen. Notice that the knight on c6 is protecting that bishop. So that's just not a good idea. Fortunately, white can chase the attacking piece away to get rid of the pin. Since black does not want white's pawn on a3 to take his bishop, he must release the pin. He can trade his 3-point bishop for white's 3-point knight, or else the bishop must retreat, probably to the e7 square. Either way, the pin is gone. There are 2 other ways to get out of a pin. Remember, every pin involves an attacking piece that creates the pin, a shield piece, and a valuable pot of gold being shielded, which is usually another piece. A third way to get out of a pin is to add another shield piece between the attacking piece and the pot of gold. White moves his bishop to d2, and now white has 2 shield pieces between black's attacking bishop on b4 and the pot of gold, white's king, on e1. If white moves his knight on c3, black's bishop on b4 won't be able to see white's king. For example, black might castle, and now White's allowed to move his knight if he wants to. The bishop on d2 is still shielding White's king and keeping it safe. The fourth and final way to get out of a pin is to move the pot of gold off of the danger line so that it doesn't need to be shielded from attack. For example, White can move his king off of the danger line. And now his knight on c3 is allowed to move once more. There is nothing behind White's knight that needs to be shielded any longer. There is no pin. White has a much better way to use this idea. So let's go back, and instead of moving the king one square, let's castle instead. This is much better. White's king is safer, the rook on d1 is well placed, and hooray, the pin is gone. To understand why castling is better than moving your king, go back and check out my video entitled Castling, the Greatest Move in Chess. So to recap the lesson, you can get out of a pin by capturing the attacking piece, by chasing it away, by blocking the pin with an additional shield piece, or by moving the pot of gold off of the danger line. Pins are just one type of tactic in chess. I hope they make a little more sense to you now. In general, if you want to become a better chess player, practicing tactics is probably the best way to do it. You can become a master level chess player just by getting really good at tactics. If you're interested in practicing your chess tactics, puzzles are the best way to do this. You can find free tactics puzzles on websites like chesstempo.com or lichess.org. That's lichess.org. There are also lots of tactics books too, if you prefer that. Just keep it fun and make sure the puzzles are not too difficult for you. Thank you for paying attention. Tune in next week as I cover another type of chess tactic in my lesson, May the Fork Be With You. I certainly appreciate everybody sticking it out, and hopefully you've learned something today, and I will look forward to teaching you about forks in our next lesson.
All right. Otherwise, goodbye, everyone.
All right. Stay safe, everybody. I'll see you soon.